At the family dinner table, my mother smiled like everything was normal and said, "You can take the guest room, or you can leave." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. For a second, I honestly thought I misheard her. The room smelled like roasted chicken and garlic bread, the same way it always did on Sundays. My dad sat at the head of the table, cutting his food slowly, like nothing strange had just been said. My younger sister Maribel stared down at her plate, pushing peas around with her fork. This wasn't about space. This wasn't about comfort. It was about who they had already chosen over me, and what they thought I'd tolerate. Please stick with me, because the reason they said this, and what I did next, ended my family exactly as they knew it. I had driven 4 hours after work to make it to this family dinner. Mom insisted it was important, said we hadn't all been together in months. I came tired but excited, thinking maybe things would finally feel normal again. But the moment I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. There was a car parked outside I didn't recognize. Not a guest's car, someone who lived there. It was parked confidently, like it belonged. I remember sitting in my own car for a minute, staring at it, feeling this quiet unease settle in my chest. Inside, everything looked the same, but not really. My dad hugged me, stiff and quick. Mom kept smiling too much, like she was hosting co-workers instead of her daughter. Maribel barely spoke, which was unlike her. Then dinner started. Small talk. Work. Weather. Traffic. And then Mom dropped it. Calm. Casual. Public. You can take the guest room. Or you can leave. Silence swallowed the table. I looked at my dad, waiting for him to laugh it off. He didn't. He just kept eating. Like this had already been decided somewhere without me. The guest room? I asked quietly. It's more practical, Mom said. Your old room is being used. Being used. I didn't even remember standing up, but suddenly I was. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. Someone else was living in my bedroom. My childhood photos. My books. My bed. All replaced. That unfamiliar car outside suddenly made sense. And in that moment, sitting at the table where I'd grown up, I felt the first real crack of betrayal split straight through my chest. I just didn't know yet how deep it went. Mom didn't wait long after dinner. She stood up, wiped her hands on a napkin, and said lightly, "Come on, Lena. I'll show you your room. Your room." The way she said it already felt wrong. I followed her down the hallway I had walked 1,000 times growing up. Every frame on the wall was still there, family vacations, school photos, birthdays. But I suddenly felt like I was looking at someone else's life. She stopped at the guest room and pushed the door open. "There you go," she said, smiling like she'd done something kind. I stepped inside slowly. The room was cold. Not temperature, feeling. The bed was perfectly made, stiff white sheets tucked tight like a hotel. No pictures. No color. No sign anyone actually lived there. A single lamp. An empty dresser. A closet with 2 spare hangers. Temporary. That was the word that kept echoing in my head. I turned back toward the hallway without saying anything. Just a few steps down was my real bedroom. The door was shut. I stared at it. "Mom," I asked quietly, "can I see my room?" Her smile tightened. "It's occupied right now." Occupied. Not packed. Not stored. Occupied. Before I could ask more, Dad's voice called from the kitchen, asking Mom something pointless, like he was rescuing her. She used that moment to step away from the conversation completely. I stood there alone for a second, staring at the closed door that used to be mine. Instead of knocking, I walked toward the garage. I don't even know why. Maybe I already knew what I'd find. When I opened the garage door, the smell of dust and cardboard hit me first. Then I saw them. My boxes. Stacked against the wall like old storage no one cared about. Some were open. I could see my high school yearbooks, my childhood trophies, even my winter clothes stuffed inside garbage bags. It looked rushed. Careless. Like I'd been cleared out, not moved. I picked up one box and saw my name written in Mom's handwriting across the tape. That's when my chest started to feel tight. From inside the house, I suddenly heard laughter. A man's voice. Deep. Comfortable. Like he belonged there. It came from upstairs, right above my old bedroom. I froze. No one had told me someone was living here. No warning. No conversation. This wasn't last minute. This was planned long before I even drove down for dinner. Standing there in the garage, staring at pieces of my life stacked like discarded furniture, the truth settled in heavy and cold. I hadn't just been moved. I'd been replaced. I met him the next morning. I came downstairs early, still tired from the long drive and barely any sleep in that cold guest room. I was halfway to the kitchen when I heard a man's voice again, the same one I'd heard laughing upstairs. He was already sitting at the table. For a second, I just stood there, watching without being noticed. He looked comfortable. Too comfortable. One arm resting on the chair like he owned it. Then I noticed where he was sitting. My seat. The one I'd used my whole life. The chair with the small scratch on the back from when I was a kid. Before I could even process that, I saw the mug in his hand. My mug. White ceramic with a faded blue rim. I'd bought it in college and left it here because Mom said it reminded her of me. He was drinking coffee out of it like it had always been his. "Oh, you're up," Mom said brightly when she saw me. "Lena, this is Grant." He stood up and smiled like we were old friends. "Finally get to meet you. Heard a lot about you." I forced a polite smile back. "Yeah, same." Maribel walked in behind him, quiet as usual, eyes flicking between us. Grant sat back down, again in my seat, like nothing about this was strange. Dad folded his newspaper and looked at him with approval. Grant wakes up early. Real disciplined. Not like most people his age. Mom nodded quickly. He's just so responsible. Helps around the house without even being asked. I stood there, feeling invisible while they praised him in front of me. And he really understands family values, Mom added, glancing at me in a way that didn't feel accidental. I finally pulled out a different chair and sat down slowly. "How long have you been staying here?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Grant answered casually, like it was nothing. "About 2 months now." 2 months. I looked at my parents. Neither of them reacted. "You moved him in?" I asked. Mom waved her hand lightly. "Well, he needed stability. And it just made sense." Dad added, "He's serious about his future with Maribel." Encouraged. Approved. Welcomed. All without a single word to me. I stared down at the table, my appetite completely gone. 2 months of dinners. Conversations. Decisions. 2 months of my room being occupied. My things packed. My place filled. And they never told me. Not once. Sitting there, watching Grant sip from my mug while my parents beamed at him, the truth settled in sharp and clear. This wasn't just uncomfortable. This was betrayal. And it was the first time I felt it fully land. I didn't confront my parents right away. I knew if I did, they'd talk over me, twist things, make it sound reasonable. So instead, I waited. I watched. And when I saw Maribel heading toward the laundry room that afternoon, I followed her. She didn't notice me until I closed the door behind us. She jumped slightly, then forced a small smile. Hey, I said, leaning against the dryer. "We need to talk." Her hands stilled on the pile of towels she'd been folding. She didn't look at me. I gave her a moment, hoping she'd start explaining on her own. She didn't. "So," I said quietly, "how long were you planning to not tell me Grant moved into my room?" Her shoulders tensed. "It just happened fast," she muttered. 2 months isn't fast, Maribel." She kept folding the same towel over and over, even though it was already folded. "Look," she said softly, Grant needed stability. His apartment lease ended, and he was going through stuff with work, and the solution was to give him my room? I cut in. She swallowed but nodded slightly. "Mom and Dad said it made sense," she added quickly. "They said you weren't using it." "I wasn't using it because I was working and living my life," I said. "It was still my room." She finally looked at me then, eyes glassy. "They said you were too independent to care." That one landed deeper than I expected. Too independent. Like it was a flaw. Like it meant I didn't need space in my own family home. "So they decided that for me?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. "They said you were doing fine," she whispered. "That Grant and I needed the help more. Decisions were made about me. Not with me." I stepped closer. "And what did you say?" Her voice dropped even lower. I said, "Maybe we should ask you first." "Maybe." She winced. "They were already set on it," she rushed out. "They kept saying it was temporary. That you wouldn't mind. That you'd understand. And did you fight them on it?" Silence. That was my answer. I didn't fight hard enough," she admitted, voice shaking now. "I just didn't want to cause problems." I let out a slow breath, feeling something heavy settle in my chest. She looked at me like she wanted forgiveness right there in that moment. But all I could think about was the boxes in the garage. My door closed. Grant sleeping where I grew up. "You didn't want problems," I said quietly. "So you let me become the solution." Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't comfort her. Because standing there, watching her avoid my gaze again, I understood something clearly for the first time. She hadn't planned it, but she allowed it. And sometimes silence was its own kind of choice. They called me into the living room that evening like it was something formal. Dad was already sitting on the couch, back straight, hands folded. Mom sat beside him with a notebook in her lap. The TV was off. The lights were bright. It didn't feel like family, it felt like a meeting. "Sit down, Lena," Mom said gently. I sat across from them in the armchair, my stomach tight. No one spoke for a few seconds. Dad cleared his throat like he was about to discuss business, not his daughter. "We think it's good you're staying here for a while," he began. "For a while?" I asked. Mom jumped in quickly. "Just until things settle. It'll be nice to have everyone under one roof." I already knew there was more coming. I could see it in the way she held that notebook. "So," she continued, "if you're staying, we should go over expectations." Expectations. The word felt heavy. Dad leaned forward. "You'll be in the guest room, of course." "Of course." Mom flipped the notebook open. "We're asking for a small rent contribution, just to keep things fair." I blinked. "Rent? It's reasonable," Dad said. "You're an adult." I let that sit for a second before asking the obvious question. "Is Grant paying rent?" Silence. Mom avoided my eyes. Dad shifted slightly, but didn't answer. That was answer enough. "And house expectations," Mom added quickly, like she wanted to move past that part. "Chores, schedules, letting us know if you'll be late. Basic respect. Basic respect." I almost laughed at the irony. "So let me get this straight," I said slowly. "I stay in the guest room. I pay rent. I follow house rules." Neither of them corrected me. "And Grant?" I asked. "He's in a different position," Dad said firmly. "He's building something with Maribel." I felt something inside me go very still. Different position. Mom closed the notebook and looked at me with that same polite smile from dinner. "If you don't like it," she said calmly, "you can leave." There it was again. The same line. Casual. Practiced. Like they expected me to refuse and leave. That's when it finally clicked fully into place. This wasn't hospitality. They hadn't invited me home out of love. This was control. They wanted me close, paying, contributing, while still being treated like I had no place there. Grant replaced me emotionally. Now they wanted to use me financially. I sat there quietly for a moment, letting them think I was cornered. Then I nodded once. "Okay," I said. Both of them looked relieved instantly. They thought I'd accepted their terms. What they didn't understand was simple. I wasn't agreeing because they were right. I was agreeing because I needed time. And for now, staying was the first move. After that meeting, I stopped arguing. I stopped asking questions too. On the surface, it probably looked like I had accepted everything. I stayed in the guest room. I followed their routines. I spoke politely at dinner. I even handed Mom the rent money she asked for. But inside, I was watching everything. Staying quiet wasn't surrender. It was strategy. When you stop reacting, people get comfortable. And when they get comfortable, they stop hiding things. That's when I started noticing small details. Papers left on the kitchen counter. Envelopes half opened. Bills stacked near Dad's chair. At first I ignored them, but one afternoon, while grabbing water, a document caught my eye. My name was on it. I picked it up slowly, scanning the page. It was connected to the house mortgage. Refinancing paperwork. My stomach tightened as I read further. I was listed as an emergency financial backup. I hadn't signed anything. No one had asked me. But there it was, my income details, my employment information, everything. Like I was a safety net they could fall on if things went wrong. I put the paper back exactly where it was, my hands steady even though my chest felt tight. That night, I overheard raised voices in the living room. I had gone downstairs for water, but stopped when I heard Grant shouting. "I told you I'm handling it," he snapped. Dad's voice came back sharp. "Handling it how? You quit your job." "Quit." My grip tightened on the stair railing. "I had no choice," Grant argued. "The debt was already piling up." "Debt?" Mom sounded panicked. "We refinanced the house to stabilize things. You said this would work." "It will," Grant insisted, but he didn't sound confident. I stepped back quietly before they could see me, heart pounding. Now it made sense. The rushed move-in. The praise. The protection. Grant wasn't stability. He was risk. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention. More documents appeared. Loan statements. Credit notices. Numbers circled in red pen. Grant was drowning financially, and my parents had tied the house to him anyway. But the worst part wasn't his debt. It was me. They had listed me as backup without telling me. If things collapsed, they planned to lean on me, my income, my credit, my future. Not out of trust. Out of assumption. Standing alone in the guest room that night, staring at the plain walls, the betrayal shifted into something colder. This wasn't emotional anymore. It was calculated. They didn't just replace me. They positioned me. A quiet financial cushion they could fall on when Grant failed. And for the first time, I stopped feeling hurt. I started thinking carefully instead. A few nights later, we had another family dinner. Same table. Same plates. Same forced normal feeling. But this time, something had changed. Not outside. Inside me. I took my seat quietly, smiling when Mom passed the food, thanking Dad when he handed me a drink. I even asked Grant about his week like I was genuinely interested. If anyone noticed the shift, they didn't question it. In fact, they relaxed. I could see it in their shoulders, in the way Mom laughed easier, in how Dad stopped watching me so closely. To them, it probably looked like I had settled back into my role. Like I'd accepted the guest room, the rent, the rules. Like I'd fallen back in line. Grant especially seemed comfortable. Too comfortable. He leaned back in his chair, talking loudly about plans, about future investments, about how he and Maribel were going to do big things soon. Mom beamed at him like he was already family royalty. Dad nodded along, proud. I stayed quiet, just listening. Dinner stretched longer than usual, and eventually Dad opened a bottle of wine. Then another. Grant drank the most. The more he drank, the more he talked. Confidence turned into bragging. I'm not even worried, he said, waving his glass slightly. Sometimes you gotta step back before you level up. Dad frowned slightly. Step back. Grant laughed. Yeah, quitting that job was the best decision I made. That place was going nowhere. The room went still for half a second. I didn't move, but my ears sharpened. Mom blinked. You said you were on leave. Grant shrugged, careless now. Same difference. I wasn't staying there anyway. I've got bigger plans. Dad didn't look convinced. And the debt you mentioned? Grant waved his hand again. Temporary. Once things flip, it'll all clear. He said it so easily. Like debt, quitting jobs, and living in someone else's house were just stepping stones. I glanced at my parents. They looked uneasy, but not surprised. That told me everything. They already knew. Which meant the refinancing, the paperwork, listing me as backup. It was all connected. Grant kept talking, unaware he was confirming every suspicion I'd been quietly building. I sat there calmly, even smiling once or twice, letting him think his words meant nothing to me. But inside, something had settled fully into place. I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't reacting emotionally. I knew the truth now, about his debt, his job, and my parents' plan to use me if it all collapsed. I finished my dinner slowly, set my fork down, and excused myself politely. No anger. No confrontation. Not yet. Because that night, walking back to the guest room, I made a decision that felt clear and final. I was done surviving in that house. Now, I was going to end it. The next evening, I called everyone into the living room. Mom and Dad looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maribel shifted uncomfortably on the couch. Grant leaned back, confident, smirking like he was in control. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't yell. I just opened my laptop and set it on the coffee table. Then I opened a folder. Let's go through this, I said calmly, clicking on the first document. The screen showed bank statements, mortgage documents, and loan agreements. My name was listed as an emergency backup for the house. I explained each line slowly, without emotion. You refinanced the house without my knowledge. I was never asked to consent. Yet here I am, tied financially to everything in this house. I moved to the next document, emails and paperwork showing Grant's debts, the money he owed, and his unpaid bills. This isn't just about mistakes. It's about risk. You intentionally put me in a position to cover this without telling me. I watched their faces carefully. Mom's hands trembled slightly. Dad's jaw tightened. Maribel's eyes widened. Grant leaned forward, trying to look intimidating. You can't just make claims like that, he said. I didn't flinch. I clicked to the next file. Legal proof I had already removed myself as emergency backup. I explained how I had contacted the bank and filed the paperwork legally. I also told them that I had anonymously reported the irregularities to the proper authorities. Everything is now under review, I said. The room went silent. Mom's voice cracked. Lena, we didn't think. Dad shook his head, unable to speak. Grant's smirk faltered. He tried to sound confident. You don't know what you're doing. This could backfire on you. I looked him straight in the eye. I know exactly what I'm doing. I know the house, the finances, and the consequences. And I know I don't owe anyone here anything. Maribel didn't move. She just stared at the floor, finally realizing the gravity of what we'd all been doing. I closed the folder gently and shut the laptop. Calm, collected, quiet. No yelling. No anger. Just facts. I stood there and watched them process it, watched them realize that everything they thought they controlled, the house, Grant, even me, was no longer in their hands. And in that quiet living room, the balance shifted. For the first time, I felt fully in control. I didn't need permission. I didn't need approval. I had the truth, and that was enough. The next few days were quiet but tense. By the weekend, the consequences started hitting. Grant had to leave the house. The bank and the authorities moved quickly after reviewing the paperwork and irregularities I had reported. He tried to argue, tried to explain, but no one was listening anymore. The house, the finances, the approvals, they were all under scrutiny, and he didn't have a leg to stand on. My parents' faces showed stress I had never seen before. Bills that were ignored or hidden suddenly mattered. Loans and refinances had to be addressed properly, and my parents were scrambling to handle the fallout. They realized too late that their decisions had consequences, and for the first time, the perfect image they tried to maintain for years was cracking. Maribel broke down one afternoon. She sat in the guest room, tears falling, and admitted everything she had let happen. She hadn't fought, hadn't told me the truth, and now she felt the weight of what she had enabled. I didn't know it would get this bad, she whispered, voice shaking. I didn't think it through. I didn't respond immediately. I just let her feel it. The same helplessness I had felt when I discovered my room was gone, when my belongings were stacked in the garage. Her guilt was real, but it didn't erase what had happened. Mom and Dad approached me together, voices trembling. Lena, please stay. You're still family. We need you here, they said, desperation in every word. We can fix this. We want you to stay. I looked at them, at the house that had once been my home, now full of chaos and broken trust. I thought about the years I had spent trying to be the good daughter, the obedient one, the one who tolerated silence while everyone else made decisions about me. I'm not asking for permission, I said slowly, voice steady. I'm not asking to stay, and I'm not asking to leave. What I am asking for, and what I always asked for, is respect. Their faces fell. They had finally seen it, too late. They couldn't argue or bargain. Respect isn't given lightly, and it isn't earned by control or appearances. I stayed standing. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't shout. I simply made them understand that their actions had consequences, and the family they thought they controlled had changed. For the first time, I felt power, not over them, not out of revenge, but because I had taken control of my life. The guest room had once been a symbol of their control. Now, leaving it empty, I had it all, my dignity, my voice, and my choice. I packed my things quietly. Not the boxes shoved into the garage months ago, not the items left behind as if I didn't belong. This time, it was deliberate, clean, and complete. Every paper, every photograph, every piece of my life that had been used, ignored, or replaced went with me. I didn't make a scene. I didn't yell or slam doors. I didn't leave a note dripping with anger. I simply walked through the rooms I had known my whole life, now strangely empty, and took only what was mine. The guest room was just that, a guest room. I didn't linger there. I didn't need it. It had never been my space. I moved through the house slowly, observing, remembering, but not engaging. No one followed me. No one tried to stop me. They had already realized their power over me was gone. The dinner table, where so many conversations had been controlled, where my voice had been small or ignored, stood empty. No laughter. No polite smiles. Just chairs, like witnesses to years of quiet manipulation. I paused for a moment, thinking about the countless meals where I had swallowed more than just food. And then I let it go. Everything I had done to reclaim myself, the legal removals, the anonymous reports, the careful observations, the patience, I carried silently with me. There was no spectacle, no revenge party, no public shaming, just the truth and the clarity that comes when someone finally stops being a pawn in their own home. I looked back once at the front door. The driveway, the cars, the familiar walls, it was theirs now. But I wasn't theirs anymore. I had what they could never take, my dignity, my choices, and my voice. They had said the words casually with false politeness. You can take the guest room, or you can leave. And I did leave, but not in anger, not in chaos, not in a way they could understand or predict. I left with everything they tried to take from me, my agency, my boundaries, and the knowledge that I belonged to myself first. As I drove away, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: closure. Not triumph, not forgiveness, just a quiet, steady sense that I had reclaimed my life on my terms. And in that stillness, I knew the final truth. Leaving doesn't always mean escaping. Sometimes it means arriving at yourself. If you've ever felt controlled or overlooked in your own home, this story shows the importance of knowing your rights, setting boundaries, and taking legal steps when needed. Learn how to protect yourself financially and emotionally, and remember, standing up calmly and strategically can reclaim your power without conflict.